Warframe celebrates its 12th anniversary, and the next free loot we're gonna get in the process will be the Dex Sybaris. And let me tell you, this rifle really surprised me. So, in today's Warframe guide, we're gonna take a look at it, discussing both a beginner-friendly build for all the newer tenno out there, but also I have a super strong Incarnon build that just melts away Steel Path. As always, big shoutouts to all our generous channel members who help me keep the lights on, and now, let's jump right into it. Alright, first things first, let's talk about the basics, starting out with how you can actually get your hands on the Dex Sybaris yourself. As I said in the intro, the Dex Sybaris is part of the Warframe Anniversary event, so you can get it as free loot, and all you need to do is play the event mission from which it drops. You can find that up here when you are on your star map, and because of the fact that this video is pre-recorded, it obviously shows the old alert, but when you open that yourself, you should see a mission with the Dex Sybaris on it, play the mission and you get it for yourself, and even if you already own it, don't forget that it comes with its own inventory slot, so you can play the mission again, get a second copy of the weapon, and then sell it off to keep the free weapon slot. Especially with all the infested lich weapons coming up in the next update next week, having more inventory slots is always a big W. But now, let's talk about what the Dex Sybaris even is and how it works. And here I decided to structure this video a little bit different compared to my other weapon guides, in that first we're going to talk about the base functionality of the weapon, then I'm going to show you the beginner build, and only then afterwards we're going to discuss the Incarnon version, how that changes the weapon, before going into the endgame build. So here we go. At base, the Dex Sybaris is a burst rifle firing a 2-round burst. The fire rate of 3.33 looks very low on paper, but I feel that the bullets within the burst itself are fired much more rapidly. When it comes to the weapon stats, then first and foremost, we get a relatively high base damage of 75 in total, combined with really good crit characteristics of 35% chance and 2x multiplier. However, the base status chance of just 10% isn't all that amazing, so the Dex Sybaris likes to be modded into crit and flat damage. And now that we're already speaking about building the darn thing, let's take a look at the beginner build for all you tenno out there who are still in the early or mid-game sections of the game and got the Dex Sybaris from the event, wondering whether it is any good. Given the fact that it is primarily a crit rifle, what we do here is, of course, Serration and Split Chamber for base damage and multi-shot, Point Strike and Vital Sense to double down into crit, significantly increasing both crit chance and crit damage, Vigilante Armaments for even more multi-shot, although this mod is debatable, you could also go for more fire rate or something. Then I chose Hammer Shot for even more crit damage, and finally I would go for a combined element. In this case here I went for Viral, but depending on which enemy faction you're up against, you of course want to swap it out. So for example, against Grenier you would go Corrosive, against Corpus either Toxin or Magnetic, and against Corrupted, Viral. This then right here would be the full build, and with it you will easily be able to clear the entire base story, finish the star chart, because as you also see right here, I took this weapon into arbitrations and it makes very quick work of the enemy. And as always, if you could maybe make quick work of that like button, then I would be very happy because it always helps big time with the YouTube algorithm, so cheers so much for your support. But so much for the beginner stuff, let's now talk about endgame, Steel Path, and big damage numbers. First of all, let's go into the Incarnon mode. As with all Incarnon weapons, you can occasionally get the Incarnon adapter for the Sybaris from doing the Duviri circuit, but for the Sybaris, you can also just go to Cavallero on the Zeraman 10-0 and buy the Incarnon adapter plus all the resources that you need for the evolution in a pack for 120 platinum if you like. You can then, just like with most other Incarnon weapons, charge the Incarnon meter by getting headshots or headshot kills, and once the Sybaris is transformed into the Incarnon mode, it will change quite a bit. First of all, instead of doing a 2-round burst that it does at base, it now shoots a 4-round burst, with also a relatively decent ammo supply that doesn't need to be constantly reloaded, which is nice. But most importantly, every bullet that you fire will get a guaranteed blast status effect. And this is exactly the secret why the Incarnon versions of the Sybaris family are so insanely powerful in later game. Let's take a look at all the evolutions first. First of all, as I just said, Evolution 1 unlocks the Incarnon mode in the first place, giving you guaranteed blast status effects. Evolution 2 increases your base damage. My personal favorite here is the one that also gives you more multi-shot, because as you're gonna see in a minute here, multi-shot is the secret for this blast build to work. Evolution 3 is not all that important, to be honest, because it's more quality of life, but I personally chose the recoil reduction because while yes, the recoil isn't all that bad, we really want to make sure to hit every single shot of our 4-round burst, and as you can also see here, with the recoil reduction, the Sybaris is quite a bit more stable. And then finally, and this is probably the biggest and also most surprising one, would be Evolution 4, where we have the option to either get a lot more base status chance, plus 15% at base, but doubled in Incarnon mode, so plus 30% base status chance in Incarnon mode, which is a crazy lot. The second one increases our base damage when every single shot of the burst hits, and the third one increases our base crit chance plus base status chance, both by a bit. Now, you might call me crazy, but what I did here is I actually went for the one that gives us more crit chance. And I know what you're thinking, we're doing a blast build, right? For a blast build, we want to inflict as much blast as possible, so why not go into status chance? Well, let me explain, and here I first quickly want to go over the blast status effect itself again, just so that we're all on the same page. What is important to know about blast is that as soon as you manage to stack 10 blast effects on the same enemy, this will cause an explosion around that enemy, dealing damage to nearby foes with an additional damage bonus. So for blast, what you always want to do is get to 10 stacks to cause this explosion and deal AoE damage. But with the Dex Sybaris, we have a practical issue here. Once you reach those 10 blast stacks on an enemy and the enemy explodes, that will naturally make the enemy stumble around. So if our status chance is so high that we would theoretically deal more than 10 blast status effects with one of our 4-round bursts, then in practical gameplay, what's gonna happen is, once you've stacked enough blast, let's say after 2 of the 4 bullets, the enemy is gonna cause the explosion, stumble around, and because of that, there is a good chance that the rest of the burst is actually gonna miss the target and land somewhere in the wall. By the way, I made this little recording in the background right here in ultra slow-mo to hopefully be able to visualize a bit better what I'm talking about here. But what that means in simple words is, if our status chance with the Dex Sybaris is so high that we reach 10 blast procs before the end of our 4-round burst, that means we run the risk of missing more shots, therefore getting diminishing returns. And remember, regardless of our status chance, the Incarnon version itself already gives us guaranteed blast procs with every bullet fired. As long as we have enough multi-shot, we're gonna get to 10 blast procs anyway, so I personally rather focus on crit performance. But I think the whole concept is gonna become much clearer when we take a look at the build now. Now, this right here would be my Incarnon build. And I know what you're thinking, this looks very confusing at best, so let me explain exactly what's going on here. First of all, of course, we go for Galvanized Chamber, which at maximum stacks will give us plus 230% multi-shot, ensuring that we always fire enough bullets to trigger 10 blast procs in one burst on just the guaranteed blasts alone. Next, we massively double down into the crit performance with Point Strike and Vital Sense plus Galvanized Scope. And then, because it is a blast build, of course, we need a faction damage mod as well as Rifle Elementalist. Our base damage is going to come from Galvanized Aptitude, and then, surprisingly, we don't even mod Blast on the weapon itself, because remember, we have guaranteed Blast procs from the Incarnon mode alone, so the last mod I'm going for here is Primed Cryo Rounds, giving us a big chunk of pure cold damage. Now, as you might have seen, there is no arcane here, and that is because I want to discuss 3 different arcane options in a bit more detail here. Primary Merciless, Primary Crux, as well as Primary Frostbite. First of all, I thought because we're doing a blast build here, it would be so great to mod Blast onto the weapon, combine it with Primary Crux, and get all that juicy status chance. But, as we already previously discussed, Having high status chance and getting all those extra blast procs doesn't really help all that much in practice, and in my opinion is only really worth going for if you run a specific Warframe, like for example Korra, who can group up enemies and stun them in a way that they don't stumble around. In those cases, yes, going for high status chance plus blast on the weapon is, well, a blast. However, in normal day-to-day gameplay, I found Primary Crux to be quite lacking because not only does the ammo efficiency part of it not work with the Incarnon mode, but also I found that the damage numbers just weren't really there with it. Then let's next talk about Primary Merciless. Relatively simple, right? More base damage, and depending on your loadout, this can actually be a viable option if you don't have a companion that does a lot of status priming for you. See, if you have, let's say, a Diriga or a Sisters of Pavos Hound that inflicts tons and tons of status effects, then you will already get more than enough base damage from Galvanized Aptitude alone. However, if you have no source of external status priming, therefore Galvanized Aptitude barely gets you any damage bonus, then yes, a base damage arcane, like Primary Merciless, is a viable option. However, my personal favorite here was Primary Frostbite, which is also the reason why I modded Pure Cold onto the weapon, because it not only further increases our crit damage, but it also gives us even more multi-shot, so even more guaranteed blast procs, and this is a really helpful side effect, because we're inflicting cold status effects on the enemies, even if they stumble around from the blast explosion, their stumbling animation is gonna be significantly slowed, as you also see in the background right here, making it super duper easy to consistently hit their heads, and therefore deal much more blast damage in the AoE around them. Now, you might be wondering, well, this Incarnon build is all nice and well and the damage numbers are impressive, but should I really invest my Incarnon adapter on the Dex Sybaris, or wouldn't it be better to get the Sybaris Prime at some point in the future and then put the Incarnon adapter on that? Well, that's a very good question, so how about before we call it a day and end the video, we take a minute to compare the Dex Sybaris versus the Sybaris Prime. And when it comes to that, then the first thing I want to talk about is resource investment. See, since the Dex Sybaris is obtained from the anniversary event, it comes pre-installed with one Orokin Catalyst, meaning double the mod capacity by default. The Sybaris Prime does not have that luxury. However, on the other side, the Sybaris Prime comes with quite some nice pre-installed polarities, whereas the Dex Sybaris, unfortunately, is lacking quite a bit here. What's probably more interesting to you would be the stats, and when it comes to that, then the two are actually relatively similar. I mean, yes, the Prime does have a bigger magazine size, which is nice, but therefore it also needs longer to be reloaded, and the only really significant difference that we see here would be that the Prime has a much higher status chance than the Dex variant, at the cost of 5% less crit chance. Now, usually more status chance would be a crystal clear plus point for any blast build out there, but as we previously established, in case of the Sybaris Incarnon, status chance is actually not really what we want for the blast build. So the advantage that the Sybaris Prime has over the Dex here isn't all that impactful. If anything, then the only plus point that the Sybaris Prime has is the higher base damage over the Dex variant, but that is not as crazy of a difference as you might think. So yeah, long story short, when it comes to installing your Incarnon adapter, then yes, technically the Sybaris Prime is the superior weapon because of the higher base damage, but because of the fact that we don't really use the higher status chance here, it doesn't significantly outperform the Dex variant. Meaning, if you're still a relatively new player and you get the Dex Sybaris from the event, then feel free to invest as many forma into it as possible, with the thought in mind of one day turning it into its Incarnon form. That is perfectly viable. And yes, just for completion's sake, between the Prime and the Dex variant, there are certain slight differences in how high the buffs from the Incarnon adapter end up being, but if you ask me, also here the difference is so low that it's not really worth mentioning. And in case you haven't prepared yet for the upcoming Warframe update, then you will find all the important info on that right here. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nostlinux Gaming, Turtle Pier, Lycan Shepherd, Andakanio2, Pepperwolf, Mihawky, Hoke Hunter, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.